and the contrast between the righteous and the wicked. But first, I would like to begin with a story. Joe Christian has been out of work for some time now and was beginning to grow agitated towards God. He's been begging God for a job and could not understand why God was not providing for him. He recalls the last week in order to make sure that he has done everything right. It's Thursday night and Joe Christian thinks to himself, "Self, I should read my Bible because God will be happy with me if I do." Joe Christian then proceeds to flip open to a random spot in his Bible and begins to read. He has a hard time understanding and easily gets distracted after 5 minutes. He thinks to himself, "I wonder if my DVR is set to record The Office." He turns on the TV and quickly finds himself lost in the fine programming that is on NBC. He does not return to his reading. The next Sunday, Joe wakes up late after a long night of poker with the guys and realizes that he has only 30 minutes to get ready and get to church. It's no big deal for Joe, and he slowly gets out of bed and begins to get ready. On the drive to church, he cuts off as many people as possible in order to make great time, not realizing that his "Honk If You Love Jesus" bumper sticker is not what is causing all the racket. Despite all his impeccable driving, he still arrives at church 10 minutes late. East Side time if you're from my church. Seeing that the visitor parking is open, Joe, an attendee of this particular church for 10 years, proceeds to take the spot, paying little attention to the Christian mother with the 3 children directly behind him. He walks up to the unmanned door in order to avoid being greeted. After all, Joe likes his anonymity. Upon entering the building, Joe is greeted by the sound of worship in the main sanctuary, but, needless to say, Joe must get his cup of hymn before he can properly worship. So he makes a trip to the coffee bar. He finally strolls into the sanctuary and picks a seat as far back as he can. After all, if he were to sit up close, he might need to sit next to someone. He begins to worship just in time for the last song, but is constantly looking around to rate the potential spousability of the church this week. That one was for Jeremy, and he's not here. Not seeing anyone of interest, he finally turns his attention to God, only to be interrupted by the single mother, whose spot he had taken, trying to get past him into the open row. She is greeted with an angry sigh, and he begrudgingly lets her by, commenting under his breath about how this is his time to worship. Worship now completed, Joe conveniently forgot his checkbook again. He decides that it's not really a big deal if he was to give God only 1%, since, after all, it's all he has on him, and God honestly can't be angry with someone giving. He smugly puts in his 20, taking 5 out for change, and silently judges the single mother who puts nothing into the basket. The pastor begins to give his sermon on good Christian character, and Joe immediately thinks to himself, "This is perfect. This lady next to me really needs to hear this sermon. She interrupted my worship, and she didn't even put anything in the offering. I really hope she pays attention." Joe then quickly begins to let his eyes wander, begins comparing people's clothes to his own, and once again checking for any missed candidates for spousability. The sermon done, Joe leaves in a hurry, not saying a word to anyone, and quickly goes home. 2 weeks later, Joe is still in dire need of a job and quickly gets frustrated with God for not providing. Joe blames God, saying, "God, where are you right now? I have done all the things that you tell me to. I read my Bible, I go to church, I even greeted that one lady sitting next to me, yet you have not given me what I need. I thought that you were supposed to give me what I need if I do the things that I'm supposed to do. This is the deal, isn't it? When is it going to start paying off in my favor?" This last thought seems a little too familiar to some of us, doesn't it? I know it does to me. Too often I like to think that God owes me something out of the nature of my relationship to him. I think that I am deserving because I have obeyed him. And after all, he wants to bless me above all people. I like to think that I deserve it. But instead of blessing me, it seems that God has decided to bless all those around me. In fact, he even seems to bless those who do not even go to church or obey him at all. Those who don't even have a relationship with him. What's the deal, God? Did you change the rules on me? I'm sure that many of you have thought something along these lines at some point in your life. And when we look at our Malachi passage, it's clear that the Israelites feel the same way. Chapters 3:13 through 18 shows that the Israelites were facing many of the same issues that Joe Christian was facing, and I'm sure that many of you are facing as well. The The text begins with the prophet declaring in verse 13 that, "You have said harsh things against me, says the Lord. Yet you ask, what have we said against you? You have said it is futile to serve God. What did we gain by carrying out his requirements and going about like mourners before the Lord Almighty? But now we call the arrogant blessed. Certainly the evildoers prosper, and even those who challenge God escape." In verse 13, the charge is brought against the people by the Lord. The people have been grumbling against God. They are upset with him due to the way that they are being treated. In their minds, there is a problem. God is not coming through for me. There is no problem with being upset with God. There's a biblical model in the lives of Job and Jeremiah and in the Psalms which shows that the proper way to grieve is to bring your problems before the Lord so that you can work them out with him, so that he can answer you. But it is clear from the text that this is not what the Israelites were doing. Rather, they were talking amongst themselves and beginning to believe that God did not care for them at all. They were not trying to resolve the problem. They were just trying to prolong it. They were trying to just gain sympathy for themselves. In verses 14 and 15, what the people have been saying about God and their relationship with him becomes clear. The people seem to have been making three general complaints about God. 1, it is futile to serve him. 2, we do not gain anything from carrying out his requirements. And 3, the arrogant are blessed. These three complaints can be understood better when remembering that the Israelites were at this time under the rule of the Persians and their governors. They were being oppressed in their own land, in the land that God promised them. They had returned to the land. They had rebuilt the temple and were expecting the blessings of God to return to them. But evidently they had not. The people were still poor, they were still oppressed, and the nations around them seemed to be blessed by God. It is easy for us to feel the same way when the nations around you are blessed in the midst of a recession. It's difficult for us to think that God is blessing us during this time. This could lead anyone to think that it is futile to serve God. This idea of futility is better understood still when taken with the next claim. We do not gain anything from carrying out his requirements. We do not gain anything from carrying out his requirements. Although the Israelites were doing everything that was right, as did Joe Christian, their ritual observances and appeals to God were not being accepted. They were being judged based on their heart and not on their observance of the laws. Once again, we are reminded that while man looks at the outward appearance, God looks at the heart. The Israelites did not have hearts that were seeking after God. Instead, they were seeking after what could be gained from the observance of his laws. The Israelites were approaching their relationship with God through the lens of a vending machine, where if they put in the right coins, ritual sacrifice, mourning, etc., then out comes not soda, but the blessings of God. It's really easy for us in our own lives to think the same way. We read our Bible, we go to church, we give, in order so that God is indebted to us, not because we want a good relationship with him, not out of the goodness of our hearts. The people of Israel had so warped their view of their relationship to God that he was little more than a vending machine to them. I can only hope and pray that we do not think of him in the same way, and that if we do, we can change that. I hope that we rather think of God as one to be honored and feared, as did some other Israelites. Let's take a look at verses 16 through 18. Verse 16. Then those who feared the Lord talked with each other, and the Lord listened and heard. A scroll of remembrance was written in his presence concerning those who feared the Lord and honored his name.